All right, let's just dive right into this explainer on the 1947 partition. We're talking about a monumental, world shifting moment in modern history. It was an event where this long awaited triumph of freedom almost instantly mutated into an unprecedented human bloodbath. So today we're going to peel back the layers, look beyond just the high level politics, and really focus entirely on the human cost of this division.
Picture this. At the exact same stroke of midnight, political celebrations in the capital cities were being completely drowned out by the sudden, massive horror of displacement on the borders. While flags were going up and national anthems were being belted out in Delhi and Karachi, ordinary people over in Punjab and Bengal were suddenly waking up to find out that the very ground beneath their feet no longer belonged to them.
So let's kick things off with Section 1, the midnight of 1947, a historic climax.
You know, while political leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru were delivering these sweeping, historic speeches about destiny, and Muhammad Ali Jinnah was being sworn in as Governor General of Pakistan over in Karachi, a totally different reality was dawning on the public. Ordinary citizens, folks who had lived alongside each other for generations, suddenly realized their ancestral homes were now sitting right in the middle of a foreign country. The disconnect between the political halls and the village streets was just absolute.
And this really perfectly illustrates the sheer disconnect of 1947. You have Lord Mountbatten sitting securely inside the high walls of Viceroy House, staring at a newly drawn map. But here's the thing. A line that was literally just a few inches long on his paper translated to thousands of miles of absolute chaos on the ground. Millions of people were just completely unaware of what was hurtling toward them.
How did we even get here? That brings us to Section 2, Seeds of Division and the Divide and Rule Strategy. Let's rewind a bit. Back in 1857, Hindus and Muslims actually fought side by side in a joint mutiny against the British. Recognizing that unity as a massive threat, the British leaned heavily into a divide and rule policy to separate the communities over the following decades. From the 1905 partition of Bengal all the way to the creation of separate electorates, these tiny differences were magnified, eventually leading to this tense, unbreakable political deadlock. All of that friction eventually snowballed into what's known as the two-nation theory. Basically, this ideology argued that Hindus and Muslims weren't just followers of different religions, but entirely distinct nations with different cultures and traditions. Championed by Muhammad Ali Jinnah and the Muslim League, this became the core ideological driver for the creation of Pakistan. It fundamentally altered the political landscape of South Asia forever. But those escalating political tensions culminated in a truly horrific way during the 1946 Direct Action Day in Calcutta. 5,000 people, 5,000 lives were lost in just 4 days of brutal communal violence. The sheer scale of it served as a grim, undeniable warning. For a lot of political leaders, a divided partition suddenly seemed like the only desperate way out to avoid a full-scale nationwide civil war. Moving right along to Section 3. The Radcliffe Line, or how they actually drew the borders.
Okay, so fearing massive civil unrest and a complete loss of control, Lord Mountbatten makes a huge call. He abruptly yanks the independence timeline up. He dragged the departure date from June 1948 all the way up to August 1947. It was an act of extreme haste. Stripping away 10 vital months meant there was almost zero time left for any necessary administrative, military, or logistical preparation. And this is where it genuinely defies belief. 5 weeks. That is all the time Sir Cyril Radcliffe, a British lawyer who, by the way, had literally never even stepped foot in India before, was given to draw borders through the deeply intermixed, culturally rich provinces of Punjab and Bengal. He was basically handed outdated maps and census data to solve a human puzzle that frankly had no mathematical solution. Working in closed rooms, Radcliffe's hasty lines split rivers right in half. They bisected entire villages, placing people's homes in one country while their farmlands ended up in another. Radcliffe himself later stated he was glad to leave and never return. He actually even refused his payment, maybe realizing that the true cost of his work could never really be settled with money. Now let's look at the direct, devastating fallout in Section 4, the Great Migration, a staggering human tragedy. The absolute second those borders were announced, total panic set in. We're looking at an estimated 1.4 crore, that's 14 million people, instantly displaced. It triggered the largest and most rapid human migration in world history. You had people piling onto the roofs of trains, loading whatever they could onto bullet parts, or simply walking miles on foot, desperate to reach the other side of a line they hadn't even seen. And the tragedy just compounds from there. Caught out in terrible monsoon floods, failing crops, and widespread communal violence along these newly invented borders, a staggering 10 to 15 lakh innocent people, up to 1.5 million, lost their lives. The chaos of that hurried British exit meant there was virtually no protection for these massive caravans of refugees.
The sheer scale of the horror is honestly hard to wrap your head around. There were these so-called ghost trains that would pull into stations filled entirely with the dead. Over 75,000 women were abducted or suffered terrible atrocities. And the refugee camps, they were just overflowing with starving, traumatized survivors sitting on baking earth, having abandoned their entire lives literally overnight.
But to really understand these massive, overwhelming numbers, we need to look at the individuals. The historical accounts tell us about people like Ramlal and Karim. They were childhood neighbors. Their kids played together, they celebrated festivals together, but when that Radcliffe line fell, Ramlal, a Hindu farmer in Lyallpur, had to flee toward India, while his neighbor Karim had to flee toward Pakistan. They passed each other in opposite directions with tears in their eyes, never to see each other again.
Ramlal, just like millions of others, had to completely abandon his ancestral lands. The village they all shared, the beloved mango tree his grandfather planted. All of it, gone. He escaped into the absolute unknown with nothing but a broken suitcase and a lifetime of traumatic memories that he would never, ever shake.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, the enduring cost and the invisible wounds left behind.
The heartbreak of the violence was so incredibly profound that Mahatma Gandhi, the very man who had spent his entire life fighting for this independence, flat out refused to celebrate it. Instead of attending the grand flag-raising ceremonies, he was fasting all alone in the riot-torn areas of Calcutta, desperately trying to bring some kind of peace, right before his tragic assassination just months later. And the legacy of that rushed partition, it is still very much with us today. It sparked 3 subsequent major wars, an ongoing unresolved conflict in Kashmir, and strictly closed borders. Ramlal and Karim's grandchildren live in Delhi and Lahore respectively today, separated by heavily militarized lines. They carry a generational trauma right in their bones, despite sharing the same food, the same music, and the exact same ancestral soil. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to reflect on. The ink on that map dried over 75 years ago. But when does a partition truly end? Thanks so much for exploring this heavy, important history with me, and I encourage you to keep questioning the lines that divide us.